scheduled for Monday. I got some kind of a chest cold, and I gave a practice talk and went with the users group after the Township Horse. Drove across the plains. It was like I was the exact opposite of the pool. 20 miles or 20 hours coming from Utah with 6 kids in the car, or 5 kids in the car. 6. My wife said 6, but 5 kids in the car. We get caught in Nebraska in this intense hailstorm and put dents in the car. Got dents in my hood. Like we never see that sort of stuff in Utah, right? And I'm hoarse the whole way. I finally tweeted Clark and said, "Hey, I'm not gonna be able to get the talk on Monday, so I have a backup plan. We got to move." So thanks everybody for coming. I really appreciate it. My name is Joe. That's my Twitter handle. This is Slow Roasted AngularJS Best Practices. I subtitled it "Succulent Advice Learned from 100,000 Lines of Code." I wanted to do like this whole like food theme, right? So I was thinking maybe we talk about testing would be the taste test, and that was the only idea that I had. And I sat for like an hour, and that was it. So I completely abandoned that idea. Went with a much better theme for this talk. Of course, it's very important. It's very important that you guys stare at this and memorize it. The sponsors obviously are important. We went on this conference without a sponsor. So to kind of help out with that, I'm going to do a giveaway. Like you guys memorize this at the end of the quiz. Winner gets a date. So study hard. All right. Everybody let's talk about themselves, right? So I'm an author for Pluralsight.com. I'm a full-time freelance author for them. I mostly do Angular courses. I've done some other stuff too, because I love front-end development. Angular just happens to be what a lot of front-end development excitement is about right now. But someday it'll be something else, and so I'll talk about that. You saw my Twitter account. If anybody wants to tweet, that they're here at the session, I have a suggested hashtag. I would like to ask for a volunteer with a phone. Do you have a volunteer with a phone? Will you come up and take a picture of everybody and then tweet it out? Yeah. That'd be cool. My phone's busy. So this is low rent recording. Oh, all right. Okay, here we go. Gotta capture this for posterity. All right, posterity. Maybe this will get retweeted more than else, but who knows? I'm also a panelist on the JavaScript Jabber podcast. If you don't listen to JavaScript Jabber podcast, it's an awesome podcast. We have really awesome guests from all over Node, JavaScript, world. So it's on every week. It's about an hour long. Make your commute a little bit easier. I'm also we just started a new podcast specifically about Angular, Adventures in Angular. The site's kind of still being put together. I think some of the artwork is still going up. So it may not look completely polished if you get it right this exact second, but another weekly podcast, this time about Angular. And I'm also an organizer for NGConf. Is anybody familiar with NGConf? A little bit? Awesome. For those who are not, it's America's only Angular conference. It's a 2-day thing. Had the entire Angular team come out and talk for 2 days to people about Angular, and also some industry experts as well. Really awesome. We're going to be announcing the 2015 version of the conference here very soon. Tickets sold out in like 10 seconds. So if you do want to go, be sure and be aware. Hit that website and you'll sign up to get updates. So let's talk about Angular. This is a very important quote for my talk, okay? Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys, hopefully, going to give you guys some knowledge. I have this t-shirt I love to wear that says I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you, all right? So I'm going to try to give you guys some knowledge. Everything that I'm going to talk about is what I consider to be best practices in Angular, and things that have been validated more or less by the community. Of course, there's dissenting opinions about everything. But imagination is far more important than knowledge. So everything that I say, I want you guys to remember that may not be a best practice for you, okay? Take what I say and apply it to what you're doing and decide, is that the right thing for you? Are you supposed to be doing this way, or are you supposed to be doing it another way? By the way, those two in the back, we've got 2 seats right here if you want to sit down. Or on each row. You won't get to sit together if you want to hold hands. Sorry. So please, everything that I say, take it with a grain of salt that you need to know that it's right for you. It needs to work for you. Okay? So, I also like to misquote Star Trek, but this is not the Star Trek. I want to start off with best practice number 1, which has to do with how to make me cry. All right? So this is best practice number 1. Don't test your code. That will make me cry. I was long into software engineering practices before I was ever into Angular. Angular, amongst all of the front-end frameworks, is the most testable. If Tom Dale and Yehuda Katz were here, they might get in a fist fight with me about whether or not Angular is more testable than Angular. But Angular was definitely more testable from the start and was designed with testability in mind. So this is best practice number 1, test your code. Let's move on to number 2. Who can tell me what this stands for? All right. I'm going to give you guys a clue. I'm going to give you 4 of the words, and then you guys got to figure out the 5th word yourself. All right? Test all the time. All right. Okay, so that's practice number 2. Let's test all the time. So we move on to number 3. Dumbest quote of the year. Can anybody guess what this is? Dumbest quote of the year.
TDD is dead. There you go.
Let's practice number 3. It's to test your code. TDD is not dead. We do not live in a world where test driving your code is a bad idea. No matter what PHH says. He gets a lot more page views if he says something ridiculous. So, I'm also a consultant. Going on to what's the best I can serve for. I happen to be a consultant. I don't really consult much. But theoretically, you could hire me to come to your company and consult. I came to your company to consult, and I saw that you were testing the code, is what I would do. And I would look just like her. So,
like her, we can hire you.
What's that?
You look like her.
Yeah, I can also do this. I can go two-handed if necessary. All right, so that was 5 and 6, right? So we've already got 6 covered. Maybe we should just end early. All right, this is, actually I'm going to go back. Now we talked about testing, which is the number 1. Okay, we started about imagination was more important than knowledge, right? Why don't you forget all that crap? You need to test your code, okay? The rest of the talk, you can apply your imagination is more important than knowledge principle. But when it comes to testing, you should be testing your code. So I want to talk about best practices for 3 different kinds of things in Angular, right? Or I'm prepared to. Let's say that. I'm prepared to talk about best practices in 3 things. Services, controllers, and how to organize your code. Now, there's more to talk about than we have time. So I would like to poll the audience, let you guys decide first off, which of those 3 you would like to hear about first. Controllers, services, or how to organize your code, name your objects, that sort of thing. All right, so let's do a little quick poll, show of hands. Who wants to first start with services? Okay, and who wants to first start with controllers? And who wants to first start with organizing your code? All right, we're gonna go with organizing your code. All right, so, no, that doesn't even apply. I'm gonna look at code. All right, this is not what I was screwing around with a bunch of stuff. Oh, you guys are seeing it. Great. Hey, you guys see it. That's awesome. I can't see it. All right, I'm going to close this up because I don't want you guys to look at this. Don't peek. This is all. Yes, say that. I don't know where it is. Say it. All right. No peeking. Baby peeking. Go ahead. This is. I can't see. There you go. Font size is way too small, right? And can you guys even read the upper left? All right. It takes me like 30 seconds to fix that. Okay, so please bear with me. Browse packages. Where's browse packages? It's under what? Crash FP? Okay, and then. No, this is not it. There's like open theme defaults so that you can edit the default theme. Anybody know that one? 'Cause I did this on my Windows box and then forgot that I was doing this on a Mac.
Literally, if you command shift V and then type browse packages,
Okay.
browse two packages.
Right, but then so that the
If you want to find it, right?
default is preferences settings. No, it's supposed to be a default theme. Okay, we may have to just skip this. This is called improvisation. All right, it's not terribly important. You guys can read this. Wish I could read it. Because each one is just a different section. So let's just continue on. We're going to talk about.
Set yours to mirror organization.
Yeah, I should set mine to mirror.
Top left, or top right up there.
This one?
No, the little thing, the little airplane thing.
This?
No. Keep going.
What do I keep going?
Well, right there, click that. Open display preferences.
Thank you.
You can command F1 shortcut for mirror act.
This guy's awesome.
I've had this happen enough times.
Thank you. Oh, that's so much better. Okay, I can read it, you guys can't. That's awesome. You're just going to trust what I say. All right, I want to talk about. Let's great go away.
Thank you.
All right. I want to talk about modules to start off. Everybody know what modules are in Angular? Anybody not know what a module is? Who doesn't know what a module is? Okay. Very quickly, this is a 10-second explanation. Modules are like this kind of like encapsulating thing, and also they're the biggest lie in Angular. Okay. A module implies some kind of a container and namespacing type thing, similar to what you might think of like, you're thinking of a compiled language, Java or C#. You might think of it as like packages or namespaces or assemblies or something like that, right? And a way to say, hey, I've got this object and it only exists and lives inside this thing, and if I have something else over here that it's got its stuff that only exists and lives inside this thing. And it's the biggest lie in Angular and one of their biggest, I won't say mistakes, but set level. But one of the design decisions that wasn't as effective as it could be. So when we create any object in Angular, we create it inside of a module. So we have to create the module first, and we can say modules depend on other modules, right? Well, modules have this problem, and the problem is that they are not namespacing containers, okay? So I want to show you guys a little bit of code. And since we can actually see code, we're not going to look at that, we're going to look at this. I don't want you guys to read my emails. So read my email. All right, here we have a very simple Angular app. Okay, I created a module called app right there. And I said that it depends on app2 and app3 module. Okay, so here's app2 module and here's app3 module. And this looks like a square. It's not a square. This is the square bracelets, right? We've got a controller that lives inside of app2 and a controller that lives inside of app3. They're both named controller1. Who can guess what's going to happen? Yeah. Hey, I'm smarter than the rest of the class. Okay, they override each other. There's no such thing as two controller ones. You get to choose which one you want in what kind of context, right? When this gets loaded up by Angular, it's going to process this. It's going to create module. It's going to say, hey, you got a module named app, and it depends on these other two apps. And it hasn't encountered the other two apps yet, so it just kind of holds on to that knowledge. Goes and encounters module 2 and module 3, or app 2 and app 3, right? It says, okay, I got you. I know all the modules now, and then it says, hey, you want to create a controller inside this module? Great, I could create a controller. You want to create another controller inside of this module? Great, I'll create that other controller. And then there's this crazy thing where it applies the modules, and it just basically overrides and just says, oh, you got the same name? Screw you. Off you go. So that's one thing that sucks about modules. Let's go to something else that sucks about modules. This is just a slightly different variation on the theme. Script. So this is not slightly different. This is the exact same thing. This is completely identical, right? This is not what I wanted to show you. All right, I'm going to skip what I want to show you. So we can do the same thing with services, okay? We do two services, have the same name, they're just going to override each other. And
You say override, do you mean that scope itself is just going to be assigned to the last one?
basically what that means is that if you ever ask for controller one, you will only get this controller one. You can never, at this point, this controller one may as well not even exist. Technically, it does exist, but you can never get to it. Okay? Only this controller exists. Same thing with services. You create two services, name service one. Only one of them will ever now exist. It doesn't matter what you do, how you do it, where you do it, only one will ever exist. Okay? So, that's the problem with modules. So best practice number one is in 99% of the cases, a single module is all you need. So I'm gonna talk, let's go look at Angular Seed.
Third-party modules, and how do you make sure you don't override?
I will get to that. Okay, Angular Seed. Angular Seed tells you to do lots of stuff that's very bad. I do not like Angular Seed. I'm going to talk about all the things it does, but one of the things it does, let's look at controllers. See, it creates this myapp.controllers module. It puts all the controllers in that. Stupid, terrible idea. Well, let's not call it stupid. Let's just say intellectually less effective. Okay? This is not a good idea. Do not put your controllers, do not put things into modules for some kind of organizational idea, as if it were namespaces in C# or in Java, or the similar concept in any other language. Don't organize your code with modules, okay? We don't need to organize our code with modules. There must be ways to organize our code. So 99% of the cases, you only need one module across your entire app. Call it app, name it after whatever the project is, whatever you want to do, okay? But one module is going to handle you in 99% of the cases. There's one case where there are some sideline cases that I don't know about, but there are probably valuable reasons for modules. But the one case that there is a valuable reason for a second module is when you want to share code, okay? So if I'm creating two Angular applications and I know they're going to share a lot of code, I can do something like name both modules the same thing and then just have the controllers exist in both projects, but that can get kind of clunky, right? So instead, you can create a couple of modules. One module that's the shared code and has all the objects that might be shared between the two projects in it, and then use it in both projects. Similar to that is if you're going to publish a library for others to consume, right? Great idea to use a module just for that. You don't want to use your own module. In that case, and when you do something like that, you don't want to namespace it really well. You want to use like, something, make it a very unique name so that nobody else has problems with the same module. And then this is where it gets to your thing about third-party controls that you asked about. If you're bringing a third-party library and it has things that the names conflict, kind of bone. So when you're producing that, make sure that your names are super unique. Use dots to namespace to make them more unique, or prefixes, and we'll talk about some ways to name things next. But there's not a good way to handle that. You can't just go in and say, hey, this module, all the objects are in here. Like in other languages, let's namespace them. You just can't do that.
If all your code is in one module, does that mean it's all in one file as well? Okay, good.
No, modules and files have nothing to do with each other. You see my family full? Just one all that. Nice. Somebody hit that power button there and see if that fixes things. If this doesn't come back up, I can actually go without because I can do an interpretive dance.
Are they changing the module behavior significantly in Angular 2?
I believe they are. That's not one of the things that I'm totally up to date on, how modules work, but I believe that they are because I know that was one of the things that they are having issues with. Got no power.
There's no power here.
No power there. Oh, that's beautiful. Any luck?
Yeah, I like it, but not.
This is neat. This is the best thing ever. I think my voice going hoarse, living it, now we have the power. I love this. I'm I'm gonna write this down as the best talk I've ever given. Best presentation of the talk.
Maybe want to set on another Twitter page.
Yeah, let's like do the Twitter. Let's do the wait. Who wants to do the wait? Maybe we could sing campfire.
Irish drinking song.
Yeah. Irish drinking song.
Yeah.
So is it coming back on?
Yes, I think
Look at
so.
this. Thank you, everybody. There you go. All right. If you're at all interested, I don't know what your name is back there. What's your name?
Me?
I can't read it.
That just good.
Okay.
That's JavaScript good.
JavaScript dude. Oh, all right. If you'd like a 3-month subscription to Pluralsight, I got a card for you. Come grab me after.
Give Jimmy cash.
So the next thing I want to talk about is how to stage the speaker. All right.
So back in the previous example, if
Yeah.
that was a third-party module or a shared code, how would you name those two controllers in that module?
If I was doing a third-party one,
Yeah, so go back to the example you had that had controller 1 and 2, one from the C that you thought was, no, not that one, the one you had pulled up from the C, you thought the name was bad, where it said, there was two controllers in there.
yeah, that's.
How would you name that? Let's say that was something we're
Well, I have a lot more experience doing non-third-party code, and I'm going to talk about how to name non-third-party code. But for publishing a third-party code, I like the idea of putting in this dot and just having this kind of be the name of the third-party library, and then this could be the name. That way, my controller name doesn't have to have some big long prefix or suffix or anything, right? It could be what I feel like is very natural for the
But
controller.
then my controller 1, my controller 2, not very good namespace.
Yeah, so it would be this. All right, so it'd be my app.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how I would do it. Yes. Yeah. Now, that doesn't work for services, because services have to be parameters, right? You can't put periods in there, in which case you're down to bone. So,
It's like a follow-up question, sorry.
Please.
What about, since you can't do periods, what about something like an embedded dollar sign in the middle? So
Great idea.
dollar sign, something like that. Is that good or bad?
I think that's a good idea. I know that there are some places where Angular uses, not the standard dollar sign, that's just a prefix, because that's just convention. There are places where Angular will do snake casing and dollar sign casing. I doubt that will screw it up, but you can quickly find it out by trying. That's actually a really great idea.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Yeah, I'm thinking about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on to talking about organization and making things. So I was talking about Angular. Let's see. I want to go over just a couple of other things. This is going to move into like organizing your files and folders that I really hate about Angular C. This whole idea where I have this controllers.js. You can't see this, but it says controllers.js, and all my controllers are in here. Super, super, super terrible idea. Each controller should have its own file. This is just like any other language. Don't put multiple objects inside the same file, except for the rare cases where you have 2 objects and one's like a single line or something like that. Put them in their own. They do the same thing directed to folders. The other thing I don't like is right down here is this partials directory where they put their partials. Okay. This is one of those ones that's maybe not such a hard and fast rule. I hate this. I don't like it at all. I think that partials should live alongside the code that they belong with. Right? A partial belongs to, typically, 99% of the time, a partial and a controller go hand in hand, and a partial and a directive go hand in hand. Occasionally, you will reuse partials. You can reuse partials with different controllers, in which case, you can organize them differently. And we'll see by the time we're done with this section about where I like to put partials. But I don't like having them live in other directories. There are reasons to do this for security purposes, right? So that this is available, but the other folder is not. That can be handled really easily either by build, where you just build out any files that you don't want people to be able to just access directly, right? Accidentally guess a .js name and find a source file that's unidentified. So you can build it out, or you can handle it with routing. Easy to handle. I don't like screwing with my development organization in order to make my security in the end better. I want my build to handle that. I want my development to be as efficient as possible because that's where most of our cost comes from. efficient as possible with the most effective organization, and then build correctly to deal with things like security, stuff of that matter. So I don't like that either in an Angular seed. So let's look at better seed, right? So in that one, again, we have controllers file, directives file, services file. Let's make this just a little bit better. We've separated them all out into one file. For anybody beyond the front row, I know it's just fuzzes, but this is each a separate file for each object, okay? Isn't there a way to zoom just on the Mac? You can just zoom an area, right?
Control and two-finger, scroll, if you have it enabled in your, accessibility preferences.
Yeah, go to settings, accessibility.
This one? Zoom. Use keyword shortcuts to zoom.
Just second.
Yeah, hit the
Well,
second
actually,
check
box.
Say it again, say it, oh, you scroll.
Control and scroll.
Yep, all right, awesome. Much better, huh, guys? Can everybody read now? Okay. So here we've organized each of them into their own file. Much better. And then this is your kind of generic one. This is where you create your module. Again, this is really stupid, but this is where you create your module and you can do your routing here. You can do your routing elsewhere. I like doing my routing elsewhere because it usually quickly gets big enough it needs its own spot. All right. Let's go a little bit better than that. Let's organize our files. So, you know, again, this is fine for like a really simple example where I got 5 files and all I'm going to do is, but if we're going to do that, let's use Plunker, right? Why bother creating a 5-page, 5-file example on a disk? Just use Plunker for that, or JSBin or something like that. So in a real project, I'm probably going to grow over 5 or 6 files, so we can organize them by type. You can have a controllers directory, and instead of that, put all our controllers, filters directory. What's nice about this is every file, you can tell exactly what it is over here. Is it a filter, is it a directive? I know where to go to find it. Me, I don't like this so much for a couple of reasons. If I open up 2 files that have the same name, depending on what editor I'm using, I might not be able to tell that one's a controller, one's a directive by looking and seeing them on the tab. And I want to go to the directive, you know, or the service of my registration service. Now let's go with my Unicorn service, and not my Unicorn directive or my Unicorn controller. I can't tell them looking at the tabs the whole time. So I don't like organizing things by type. This is how everybody heard of Mean.io? Mean.io has a really great idea for organizing things. They create these things called packages, right? And they got an access package, an articles package, a registration package. Then these are things I don't like. They're full stack node, front end, back end. They put their front end in one directory, their back end in a different directory, which I do like, but I don't like that when they get down to it, they organize them by type. But I do like that they organize them by feature, registration feature, system feature. I do like that. It's a really good idea. For anything beyond the smallest applications, organizing by feature gets to be awesome. So let's organize our code by feature. By the way, I don't like Mean.io in general. Okay? No offense to the guys who do Mean.io because they've done some really awesome stuff, but there's a lot of black box stuff that it does that's really hard to some can't turn off, that you might want to turn off, and other things are really difficult to go with. So I don't like Mean.io as a starting point. So here we go by feature. I got my Pegasus feature, my Unicorn feature. Within that, I got a couple of options. I could just throw everything down, you know, in their own file, or I could organize it by type. So I like that. But let's talk about namespacing. Okay? We're talking about object naming itself. Okay? Look at this file right here. I've got, let's say I'm going along and I'm talking about unicorns and I need to make a color service, right? So I create a file called color. And a little bit later on I realize, oh, you know what, I need a different service for the Pegasus color. So now do I name it color? Yes. Can't if they're going to be in the same directory. But what about the actual objects themselves? Right? If I go in, this doesn't actually show code, but when I go in and I name the object, I got to give it a string name, right? So I'm going to name it color, and that's going to be the only color service in my entire application. And then later on, when I need to do a Pegasus, the color object for the Pegasus, not for the Unicorn, now I'm kind of sunk. I can't reuse color, so I can name it Pegasus color, right? I can call it Pegasus color over here, But now I got a color and a Pegasus color, and they don't quite match up, right? I'm stuck. So, in this work, this is the same whether they're in the same folder or not. They can be in different folders. You still, whatever you name the object, you name it color. You can't have two objects named color. And now I'm stuck. So, namespacing things is much better. Unfortunately, with Angular, unlike C# and Java and a lot of other nice languages, those are languages you can all namespace things by putting them inside of assemblies. I can't remember the Java analogy for assemblies, packages. Okay, you put them on packages, then they have the same two things, the same name can exist in two places. You cannot do that in Angular. Again, we saw that earlier with the modules problem. So you have to namespace yourself. So this is what I like to do. I like to give everything a 2-letter prefix, 3-letter prefix, some small prefix. Go long, it just gets to be a pain to type it all out when you're asking for the color service. You want the Pegasus color service, PG color. You want the Unicorn color service, UI color, right? And I have that name match the feature directory. I use a mnemonic, right? So Pegasus, there's a Pegasus folder, there's a PG prefix, and I put all the objects. I give them all the PG prefix, and then when I ask for them in Angular and I say I want you to inject and give me the color service for Pegasus, it's the PG color service. And if I want to give you the unicorn color, it's the UN color service that I'm asking for. This sort of prefixing is essentially poor man's namespacing, right? I had to do this in other places in computer science. We have to do this in Angular because they didn't provide a feature for us to do this ourselves, unfortunately. And who knows if that will change in English? No, I don't know. So we have to namespace ourselves. This is a great way to namespace things. It only takes up 2 characters, which is pretty small. And that makes a big difference between when you have color. So you got your 1 5-letter one, and then you got Pegasus color. This one's really long. So your aggregate length is much shorter this way. So that's namespacing. Let's look at naming. If I want to name my controllers, I got a couple of options. And I'm talking about both the file and the object. Now that begs a question. Should I name the object different than the file that it's contained into? Right? Varying opinions on that. My opinion, which much like my armpit may stink, is that the file name and the object name should be identical. Right? If I happen to have it open in my editor and it's up there in a tab, I know what object it is, and if I want to inject it, I know how to inject it because I can see, maybe I see the file in the file list, and that's all I need to do. I don't have to click open and remember what the name was and how it's different from the name of the file. So the name of the file, name of the object, I like them to be the same. I think that makes it a lot more effective when you're doing development. So 2 options here. Name things with just their name or give them a suffix. It's kind of an Angular common thing to do a suffix for controllers, either the full spelled out controller or CTRL. Me, I'm a bigger fan of CTRL. I like the short stuff. I think it's close enough that it works. But 2 options here, either suffix or don't suffix. Directives. We have some similar things here. So we can go with a plain naming, right? Say I got a directive for unicorn. But we can also suffix it. Unicorn, horn, directives. Obviously, I don't want to spell out directive all the way because it's really long. So maybe DI, or maybe it's unicorn, horn, DIR. I don't like either of those. DI is dependency injection. DIR is directory. So here we go. DRCT. No, that one sucks too. All right. Suffixes suck for directives. So suffixes have or directives have a unique thing in Angular. We name them when we name the object with camel casing, right? Every capital letter denotes another piece of the directive. What Angular does is it translates that when I want to use the directive, I have to, so let's look at a code example here. All right, quick code example. If I wanted to have a directive that was in my HTML, maybe it was unicorn. This would be like this, no big deal, right? A single word. But if I wanted a unicorn horn directive, That's how I would name the object itself inside of code. But when I wanted to use it inside my HTML, would be like that, okay? Snake casing. So Angular automatically does this translation. Here, I name the object. So this is when I do this, when I do Angular module directive, I'm gonna give it this name, right? That's how that works. And then when I want to use it in HTML, this is how it actually looks. This is probably my number one source of problems is forgetting these two things, right? Because you cannot do this. HTML is not pasteless, right? Even if some browsers sometimes do this. So we have this snake casing thing. So that gives us actually another option for naming our directives. You can name them snake cased, like this. What's nice about this is anytime I see a file with that name, I know it's a directive. Now this is the one variation where this won't actually match the name of the directive itself, depending on its context. So in code, when I declare it, it's going to look camel cased. Ooh, it's going to look camel cased. But when I use it in HTML, it's actually going to match up. And I like that better because I'm using my directives more in HTML than I'm naming them in the code. So when I'm using them, I'm using the snake case version.
If
So
you
that's-
use snake case in the code, will it still match up?
No. I don't actually. I'm not sure. I've never tried that. I don't know what happens. It's a good question. Somebody figure that out. Let us know. Filters. We have a couple of options. Same thing. Name it. Give it a suffix. Partials. Give it a couple of different suffix. Partial or template. But the fact that it has .html kind of indicates what it is. We already know it's a partial or template, right? Services. Do a suffix, SVC, or not a suffix, right? And then we have these special use services like models. We give those suffixes. I kind of like that. This is obviously not a controller, right?
What was it, your very first example when you were dealing with namespaces was you were using a prefix.
Yep.
Now, why again were you using a prefix versus all the other examples you were using?
So this is how to name the objects. I'm gonna bring them all together here in the next section. Let me go to the next section, and if the question isn't answered, raise your hand and I'll address it. So I showed you different ways to name things. I have my preferences as how I do them. When I said at the very beginning from 100,000 lines of code, I actually built an Angular app. It started out as Backbone. We converted it to Angular. 100,000 lines of code. It's like at 130,000 now or something like that. So we had a huge app, and we had to deal with tons of objects, tons of files, potentially lots of conflicts. We came up with this naming convention through a lot of trial and error in doing that. It works really well for anything from small, medium size and on up. The tiny stuff gets to be a little bit of overkill. You know, if you've got 10 files, it's a bit of overkill doing all this. But anything bigger than that, it's a moderate amount of effort and completely worth it as it grows. So my preferred way to do the entire thing is to have a feature to separate everything out by feature directories. Within the features, just to put the files in there with suffixes or a naming convention essentially that tells me exactly what the object is. So I can tell that this is a filter, this is a controller, this is a partial, this is a directive, this is the partial that goes with that directive, name the same. This is another partial, but this obviously isn't for that directive. So this must be a partial to go with the controller maybe. Oh, no, right here with this. Okay? This, because it doesn't have any suffix, oh, this wouldn't go with it. This, because it doesn't have a suffix, is a service. And this is a controller. So this controller and this partial go together. This service is its own service. This is a directive, partial for the directive, controller, and filter. I can identify the type of the object by looking at the name. The name of the object matches the object 100%. And if I get, we have a rule, right? If I hit somewhere around 10 files in the same directory, then I do subdirectories and do subfeatures, right? I might separate this out into horn and unicorn if there's primarily two types of files. It's usually a natural way to subfeature things out will come up. But as soon as I hit around 10, 12 max files in the same directory, I try to separate them out into subdirectories. So I can just, you know, this whole, I've got a unicorn feature, maybe next to it I've got a Pegasus feature. I can sub-feature within that all I want, all day long. more files, and then just group them all together logically. They're not represented in code, right? Because in code, all this is horn CTRL. It's not unicorn.horn.horn CTRL. It's just horn CTRL. But Angular doesn't give us the ability to put our namespaces, which are represented in folders, in code. Angular does not give us that ability. So instead, we just organize our files this way, and then the objects themselves basically go into one big global namespace. But this way, they are uniquely named. Now, to add back in the namespacing thing, which I did not do, every one of these would be prefixed like this. Gotta scroll down this. Okay? It would be like this. So, let me back up. This would be, everything would be prefixed with UN. And you see I actually did this with the directive. This would be UN horn controller. Like that. Oops. All right. And so on and so forth. I prefix everything with whatever the unicorn prefix was. So now I come down to everything that belongs to unicorn is prefixed with UN, and I can identify the type of object it is. And that means directives, even though they have a single word, they still have a snake in it. They still have that dash in it. So they're still snake case. So even though the unicorn directive is just a single word, it still has the snake in it, so I can still tell that it's a directive. So rather, it doesn't end up with unicorn JS and unicorn JS. This is the directive, and this is the service, and that one would be like that. So I can tell this is service, this is directive, okay? And Angular doesn't confuse the two. Do we have any questions?
This is a perfect example of why there's NG everywhere.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
And that's the base sort of library for everything.
Exactly. And it makes, you look in your code and you look at an HTML and you see an attribute that is a directive. You don't have to worry about accidentally naming it the same as an HTML5 attribute and then having that whole conflict, because HTML5 doesn't cacherize or snake case anything. Or HTML doesn't, so you don't have to worry about that.
I know it's a long ways out, but doesn't Angular 2.0 kind of address this whole naming issue though?
I believe it does. That was one of their big sticking points, was the whole naming issue. And so,
They do it by region though, it's cool.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I'm less up to date on Angular 2 yet.
Do you have any programmatic enforcement on that, like something for your builders run through?
I've never put one in.
When you run your build, it runs you like, oh, some any files are directly the name of this man.
No, I never put one in, but I think that's a great idea.
Team hitting the convention, especially.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we had a team of 20 front-end developers, and so we did spend a long time communicating, but in a team that big, especially if you end up with any kind of distribution, it could be a bigger issue. And at that point, the time investment of building those build tools is totally worth what you get out of it. So.
How would it filter? Where would you put that if it was used across multiple feature types?
Good idea. So I would do something like, what happened? That's not what I- Yep, sorry. Put it. Oh yeah. So I would do something like common. And just have a common folder for common things. And usually, oftentimes they'll fit things like that. It really kind of just depends on your project too, right? Sometimes you might need several, you get so many in that common, you need to sub-featureize them. But you can still put them all in a common root folder.
So the name actually has three parts of it. The director, namespace, and then the type of the file, and then the subject.
Yep.
Why didn't you do that with the service?
Because personally, I just didn't like the SVC suffix. And the only thing that doesn't have a suffix is a service. It's not suffixed and it's not dasherized or snake cased, right? So that tells me it's a service. So it was kind of if you don't have a suffix, you're a service. If you do have a suffix, then you're whatever you are. If you're snake cased, you're a directive. So if you like putting on SVC as a suffix, do it. Or S or whatever you want to do. That's would be kind of weird. But if you like putting on SVC, if you like everything having a suffix, great. This is The pain points to understand are the namespacing was a huge pain point. Putting in namespacing eliminated a ton of pain. Having files that are different names than their objects was a huge pain point that we had to address. Being able to tell what type of an object it was from the file name was a huge thing. So this is one, you could come up with another naming convention that solved all these problems. We just came up with one that we thought worked really well. We've seen it in use and adopted by plenty of other people, and it's all worked really well. So you can address all these issues. The most important thing is to understand that theories are all issues and anything over a small size project. And so being able to address all these in your naming conventions is very important. Any further questions? All right, awesome. So we have time for one more. By show of hands, who wants to do controllers next? And who wants to do services next? Okay, a slight trend towards services. So let's talk about services. That's too bad I have a funny slide about controllers. Good.
Already seen that
Yeah. Yeah, well, I got my notes in that one. All right. Services. Let's talk about solid. Some pieces of solid. The single responsibility principle and cohesion. Okay? Services should follow. Services are, let's take one step back. What's the point of a service, right? Versus the point of a control, the point of a directive, the point of a filter. Well, filters are to filter and format things. Directives are their own thing, right? Not easy to sum up in 5 words. Controllers, job of a controller. Job of a controller and the job of a service need to be defined in reference to each other, right? Because the controller does this and the service does everything else, okay? Controller's job is to mediate between the view and the model, right? That's all its job is to do. So service gets everything else. Business logic, persistence, I mean, really kind of everything falls under the term the code business logic, but services are like your classes, okay? Controllers can feel a lot different than classes. Services should feel a lot like a class in another language. These are your objects, the meat of what your application is going to do. You want to take the most, well, not the most care with them, but you want to take a lot of care with them and design them the way that good classes and objects are designed. So the solid principles apply. I'm going to talk about a couple of them. Specifically, I want to talk about the single responsibility principle. There we go. Let's look at the single responsibility principle. Let's look at the T-Rex class, T-Rex service. I don't know what the hell this thing does. It does everything. I mean, it's got like 10 methods, a bunch of stuff up front. Each of these methods does entirely different kinds of things. It does everything. This class does not have a single responsibility. Now, somebody might say, well, yeah, it is the T-Rex. Duh. It's not the T-Rex, right? T-Rex, just like a human being, is a complex thing. It has a lot of parts. We aren't, if you cut into us, we aren't baloney all the way through. We got a liver, we got kidneys, we got different pieces that contribute to the whole, right? A class as complex as this, an object as complex as this T-Rex needs to be more than one object. This does not follow a very good single responsibility. This does not follow a single responsibility principle at all. It does way too much stuff. Okay? Imagine throwing in code here and trying to understand, trying to look at this class and you know, T-Rex is made up. It's fun. Imagine this was a real class. This is like, I don't know, registration housing service, right? And you'd be like, registration housing service, and go and look at what it does, and it does 35 things. Nobody wants to maintain that way, and that's where we're going to end up encountering all of our costs, and we're screwing ourselves and we're screwing our company, right? And whether they pay you enough or not, you still shouldn't be screwing your company by writing crummy code. So keep your classes focused. A class should have a single responsibility. A service should have a single responsibility. It should also be cohesive. Everything that class does should relate to the primary job of the class. If anything that it does doesn't relate to the primary job of the class, start figuring out how to pull that out, put it in its own object. It can be a collaborator, a included object that's brought in through injection, and have that do the job. Let's do a coupling. I want to look at a highly, who can tell me what coupling is?
The opposite separation of your service.
Good, I like that, very simple. All right, let's look at a highly coupled example. And sadly, this is code that I could easily write if I wasn't paying attention, right? Or if I didn't have somebody come to review my code. This is easy to write this code. This is a pretty simple algorithm, right? The Sasquatch has a stealth factor, and he has a hide method. When he wants to hide, he's hiding against trackers. So we start out saying, hey, you haven't been seen. We go through each tracker. We compare the Sasquatch's stealth factor to some stealth objects like get detection power on each tracker. So we ask get each tracker's stealth detection power. Maybe this is a complex calculation, which is why it's in a method. We also make sure that the tracker is not sober. Sober people do not see Sasquatches, so you don't have to worry about that, right? And then if those things all come out to be true, then he's been seen, right? This is extremely coupled. This class knows all about how the stealth is determined. And this is a complex algorithm, okay? Let's look at a better example. Here we go. We bring in a stealth object, and we just say, hey, tell me if the hide is successful. Here's my stealth factor. Here's the people that are tracking. Lookers, whatever. I thought about using lookers, but then I thought that was maybe like, I don't know, a little sexist or something. So I'm not gonna go with lookers, go with trackers. Much better, much looser coupling. Okay? Keep your classes decoupled from each other, your services decoupled from each other. Very important. Let's look about size as a quick one. So, I mean, if I have to, I'll pull back up the Pokemon slapping. If you've got 154 lines of code in your service, it's time to rethink what you're doing. It's time to go home and rethink your life. And 154, I know that a lot of people tell me 154 is not a lot, and you can get into an argument, and it can devolve into a fist fight if necessary. That's a lot of code. Keep it to 100 lines. Keep it to 60 lines. Keep it to a screen height. Right? Wherever you happen to draw your line, keep your code small and focused. If you've got 154 lines of code, class is probably violating the single responsibility principle. It's doing too much for service. Keep saying class. You guys know I'm in service. It's too much code. Don't make your classes so unfocused. A build tool that warns you, hey, you just passed 100 lines of code. I'm going to fill a build. That's great. Love it. But it's a lot of effort. Instead, pair, code review, and be merciless about each other, you know, in a way that doesn't hurt other people's feelings. You don't have feelings here. I've been forced to cry many times. Or people criticizing my code. Usually it's like this. All right. I want to talk about construction. Who can tell me how many ways there are to construct a service? 3? There's a variable number of ways based on what you consider to be service construction, but 5 is a very simple answer. We're going to talk about 4 of them, and we're only going to look at examples of 3. Okay? I'm going to start off with value. Value is something that can handle a significant number of cases that it doesn't handle. Right? If I want to create a service, get a handle to my module. Does everybody understand the difference between this and this? Say it out loud.
Declaring the module.
This is declaring the module. The second parameter says, here's the module's subdependent modules, right? So if I don't have this, I'm asking Angular to get me a reference to the module that's already been created at some point previously in code. If I do this, I'm telling Angular I want to create a module named that with that name, okay? So I'm getting a handle of the module. So this avoids, just a really quick aside, the situation where you do this. Right? And then you create a global, and you just, later on, you do app.value. We don't like globals, they're a bad thing, don't do globals.
I actually have a question on that, because I've seen that before. So, what about don't repeat yourself? And what about taking an Angular.module fixed string every time on every line to pull it in versus putting a global and an iffy and just referencing it? Like,
All right.
I just don't under.
You're twisting my arm hard enough, I'll give. If it's one global, I'll forgive you, right? I'm okay either way. I do like a, you know, like a macro, maybe like a AM tab, and it'll expand it a lot for me, but
You could easily say Angular is the global.
yeah, yeah,
That's what it should be, right?
yeah.
But
But,
ultimately, does the minifier minify that out or clean that up and turn it into a global and so now you're feeling Angular.module app, you know, and there's what, 20 characters there instead of
Right.
3.
I don't, they will make some shortening up some stuff, but they won't mess with what it's global now. That's not gonna change. But, so, that's not something I'll go to fisticuffs over. I don't like it. I'm quick, I'm getting used to typing this in. Okay, creating a service, value. The value function creates a service with this name, and this is the value, or this is the service, whatever I put in here. It could be simple, it could be a number, it could be a string, it could be an object, it could be a function. Functions are objects. It could be whatever is in here, okay? So anytime you're doing relatively simple services, this will handle it, and this is great, especially for services that are strings or numbers. Going overboard and doing a different construction method is really way too much. Now, there's one drawback to this, or one weakness, or missing feature. You cannot bring in external dependencies, okay? You can't say, I'm going to create a service, and the service depends on these other services. That's the one drawback to value, okay? So if you're creating an object that's just some data, doesn't depend on anything else, maybe a bunch of global settings or something, value is a great place to do it. Magic numbers, things like that, that's a great place to do it. Another awesome thing to do is hide globals so you're not using globals. Since we're not covering controllers, we have a few minutes left. This is another great thing to do is to hide a global. Say that you're using underscore, right? I want to create a service named underscore, which is the underscore service. So now I can inject underscore anywhere I want. I just ask for the underscore, and it will inject underscore for me. And now I'm no longer using the underscore global. Personal preference, whether or not you think that's a big deal, but that can be a bigger deal when you're doing something like, is anybody familiar with Toaster that John Papa wrote? He wrote this great little notification library in Toaster. It's a global, right? That's where a lot of things come. So I can see everywhere, every controller or service that utilizes the Toaster service, I can see that because it's injected, rather than it being hidden down in the code. Okay, so that's value. Factory and service are the other two ways that we create most. Then there's two other things. There's constant, which is just like value. The only difference between value and constant, the problem I have with constant is it implies that it's actually like constant and it can't be changed, and it can. If it's an object, you can mess with it all you want. The difference is constant is created way early in the build process, so you can actually use it inside of your configuration. And then there's another one called a controller or something. There's another one that makes it really early in the service, in the build process that you don't need. So these three are good enough, right? There are other ways if you want to get more advanced. The value, factory, and service, okay? Factory and service are the ones, most people don't even know about value, don't use it. That's great. Factory and service are the ones that confuse everybody as to which does what. So, do we have a hand? The difference between factory and service is factory simply executes the function that you give it, and whatever the return value of that function is, that will be the service, okay? You simply ask for the return value, right? So if I wanted to create the unicorn factory, which simply was a 1, then in my function, I would just return 1, and then, cut out the rest of these lines of code here. And this is completely identical to this, right? It's just a service that's 1. But if I need to depend on something, I want a factory. Now I can bring in this stealth class, and I can return an object that utilizes the stealth service. Okay? Factory and value will cover 99, probably 0.9% of your needs. Service does one extra step. It essentially calls new on the function that you give it. So, if you're going to create an actual real class named, like in this case, I've got Unicorn Factory, and it's got a create method. I can make a service out of it, and it's going to create a new Unicorn Factory. But this is one of these big things about services, the service method that's misleading. For one thing, it's the service method that creates services. The factories create services, and values create services, so that was a completely weird thing. But it only creates one instance of the Unicorn Factory. So when I call service Unicorn Factory, it creates an instance of the Unicorn Factory, and that is all that exists forever in Angular, is one instance of the Unicorn Factory service. Every time I ask for it, I get the same one back. I don't get a new instance every time. Okay? I only get one instance. It's cached, stays the same. It's just like every other service. It's one instance. It's always stays the same. It just so happens it calls new. So I can do the same exact thing with factory. By doing this. Okay? And well, I'd have to inject HTTP and pass it in here, right? Okay? So those are the same things. This one just saves me this extra line of code. Other than that, they're the same. So, don't use don't use service when you don't need to. The real reason is because if somebody else comes along and knows Angular really well, then they're going to see service and think, oh, they're constructing a new class, and look for that. And then if they don't see it, it spends it's extra CPU cycles trying to grok it. Just use factory. Majority of the time, use value when it's simple, and construct your services that way. That's all the ways to construct services. We're running short on time, so asking for questions. Anybody wants to stay after and ask questions? I'll stay here for a few minutes, and we can even run an open space if that runs over. So thank you guys very much for coming. I appreciate your time. One last thing. All of this and the controllers piece and stuff about communicating between objects in Angular and communicating with the server best practices about all this stuff is all available. This is all taken from my course. It's on pluralsight.com. There's like a free 7-day trial, and we'll give you enough time, I'm pretty sure, to watch the entire course. You can go watch it for free, and if you want, or I paid my own money and subscribed because I thought it was awesome to get access to 3,000 courses, and that's why I author for them, is because I like teaching. So all of this and more, and much more depth, is covered in my course on best practices from Angular. And if anybody would like a 3-month subscription, you can ask me. Thanks. If anybody doesn't have a question, it's free to